So thank you all for coming. We're going to talk a little bit today about building a diverse student pipeline in IT, why this matters, what you can do. This is a topic that, as you'll see, I think we can both talk all day about. So we're going to talk for a little while. We're going to try to leave a good amount of time for questions. So I'm Damian Doyle. I'm the Deputy CIO at UMBC.
My name's Hepp. I'm the IT project coordinator at UMBC.
So the first thing we want to talk about is why should you care? Why does this matter? And I'll say all week I've heard about some of the threats that we're facing where we have a lot of people retiring, we lose people to industry. If you can train people up to be really good AI programmers or designers, then they're immediately snatched up by companies. So there's all these challenges around our workforce. One of the things we need to be able to do is build that pipeline and that next generation, and how do we get those people ready to come through and have that sort of next person up approach. For me personally, I will say being a student worker in IT is what sort of set my career path. And I'm going to bet if I look around, how many other folks at some point were like a student worker in IT? Got to be a couple, right? I knew when I came into college exactly what I wanted to do. I was going to be a video game designer. So I was taking my computer science degree. It was going fine. And around junior year, I said, you know, I don't really want to sit in an office and code all day. So the other part of being a video game programmer designer would be working on the art side. And I really struggle at sort of like stick figure level art. So it's like, well, so now what am I going to do? But at the same time, I was working in the physical networks department at the university, and I was getting to install switches, our first wireless. I was working with researchers, connecting them to different instruments and getting exposed to all these sort of really cool technologies and seeing this entire other aspect of technology and IT that I just didn't see in my classes and I wasn't exposed to. And that job experience is what I then went on and did. I enjoyed my classes, I learned a lot, but it was that part-time job, that practical real-world experience that changed the path of my career. And I think that's true of a lot of folks.
So I can say that also happened for me. I did not go to UMBC. I'm one of the very few non-alums in IT. However, I was a student employee at my own institution, a very small liberal arts college in Pennsylvania. I studied audio production. I was a music major. I had no idea what I wanted to do, but I was like, this seems kind of cool. I can work in a studio or do live sound or something like that. And I worked as a part-time tech in our audiovisual department. And because we were small, we did all of the event setups, we did all of the classroom setups, so I was helping with building racks and installing equipment, supporting events, and doing temporary setups, and that became, I learned more there than I did in most of my classes. Partially because I happen to have an amazing full-time staff who really invested in us in our education and helped us and taught us. And that became what I liked more than my classes, and then it came to a point where I needed some internships, and I was like, I don't really want to go sit in a studio for 10 hours. I don't want to be there until 3 a.m. every night. Like, I like to go to bed at 10. So what can I do? And I decided to go into audiovisual. So I interned with a couple of integrators and ended up bouncing around into events for a while, but then I wanted to come back to AV. So I actually came to UMBC. And one of the things I was most excited about was working with our student workforce, because as a student, I got to train my fellow students. I got to be our head tech and, you know, be the supervising student of a team of about 12. And that experience shaped so much of my career for me that I wanted to be able to do that for our students.
And so what we're going to do is we're going to go through a little bit of UMBC's story, what we did, and then we're going to follow a couple of our student journeys. And then we're going to talk about what you can do in your organizations, how can you adopt some of these practices, make these kinds of changes, and then how can that lead to sort of a pipeline for full-time staff, which is one of the other places we want to go. So we do want to do a little bit of audience interaction. So if folks don't mind, you can take your phone out. It should be big enough to scan. And then I'm just curious, in your organizations, how many student employees are you using? We'll get into a little later about where you're using them and how you're using them, but just to give us a sense of that. While you fill that out, a little about UMBC. That's the next slide. We are a mid-sized public R1 institution. We're a suburban campus. We are very reflective of our state's demographics. So we're about 53% minority students. We're an MSI, and we were founded in 1966. So we're a young organization. Okay, here we go. We're starting to get some results. So we'll leave this up for just another minute, and you can fill this out even after it's up, and we'll come back to this a little bit later. But we're seeing people have some students, but not a lot of people have a lot of students. Kudos to whoever's 40 plus. We'll get into our numbers in just a minute. So as I said, we are also very fortunate. We have a couple of scholars programs that are really focused around our diversity. So our Meyerhoff program has been around for 32 years, and this program has now changed the sort of the shape of our university and a lot of our graduates. So we are now the #1 producer of black undergraduates in the natural sciences, engineering that go on, and medical that go on to get an MD or PhD in the country. So we produce more than anyone else in the country through this program. We also have our CWIT, our Center for Women in Technology Scholars Program, and that also has a cyber scholars component to it. That program's been in existence for 25 years. It's actually, they're doing their 25th anniversary this year. So we have these wonderful, diverse programs that we can pull from at our institution. Now, when we talk about the division of IT, our diversity is a little different. I do want to call out, since we're talking about AI all week here, I went in and did some AI image generation, and I asked it to tell me, to give me a picture of a inclusive, diverse, futuristic logo for an IT organization. That is what it gave me. If you look, I think it's like a cross between Tron and the Borg. You sort of have like the pillar from Tron, and then it's very Borg-ship, and so there's still a little bit of work either with my prompting or with some of the AI. We're not quite there yet with the intent. So we're about 95 full-time staff. We are almost 50% alumni in our division that came through our programs. Our diversity is not what our institutions is or what it should be. These numbers are actually up from a few years ago, and we'll talk about sort of how that's been happening. But we also have very low turnover. So this is a long process for us to go through because most of our turnover has really been through retirements. We weathered the pandemic pretty well. We have I like to think we have a good culture. And so, it takes a long time to transition that full-time staff. But the same is not true for student staff. So 10 years ago, we were having a division-wide meeting, and we asked the president of our university to come in and kind of talk about the state of the institution, what we were focusing on. It was the beginning of our strategic planning process, and he got done the meeting, and then he went to our CIO and some of the leadership, and he said, happy to talk to you. That was a great meeting. I loved all the questions. He said, but he looked at a couple of us. Why does everybody in that room look like you? And we sort of had to take a step back. We hadn't really been paying attention to that. We had some great student workers, and we would ask them, hey, do you have you're a great student worker. Do you have any friends that want a job? And then we would recruit from their friends. And so we just had this cycle, and we just weren't being intentional about any of our hiring. And so our numbers were atrocious. We were almost entirely white men. So we set out on a path to try to be more intentional about our hiring, our recruiting, and what our workforce looked like to see, what can we do if we pay attention to this, and what would that do to transform our organization? And so today, this is what our student workforce looks like. This is quite different than those last numbers. So and this did not take 10 years. I want to point that out. This is who they are today. But if we run these numbers from 5 years ago, so 5 years ago, we were up to 30% female identifying students, up from about 10%. We ran those numbers again just a few weeks ago to prepare for this. We're now at 35%, which is significantly above our average in our computer science and our information systems program. So we're making real substantial progress ahead of our university, ahead of most of the national averages. And when we look at the racial demographics, in 5 years, we went from 90% Caucasian to 66% minority, less than 1/3 Caucasian. We ran these numbers 5 years ago. They didn't move. So we are We are 2/3 minority in our student workforce, which is even better than our state demographics, even better than our university demographics. We still have some of the habits where we will ask a great student, do you have a friend? Can we get them? You've been great. But now we're asking those questions from a diverse pool. And so we are building on that diversity. And this has led to a lot of changes in organization, and it has really helped sort of move the needle on how we do a lot of things. So these are just a couple of pictures of some of our student groups, some of our desktop support, AV services, and a couple of different groups. And if I had taken 20 or 30 pictures of each of the student orgs or student groups, they would all look very similar to this. And it really is, I can't say enough what a difference it's made in the functioning of those teams, in the environment, in how the students see themselves, and how they function in those groups. So part 2 of interaction. Just simple word cloud, 1 or 2 words. What benefits could you see of building a more diverse student workforce, of not having everyone have the same backgrounds, the same ethnicity, the same gender? So we'll give you a minute for that. And then I think, and so while you take a minute and do that, we're gonna shift after this to talk about some of our student journeys. And what we want to do there is kind of introduce a couple of these students, show you where they started out, when they came to us, and then kind of their path forward, where they are now, and then talk about how you can do some of the recruiting. And then once you get student workers, what do you have to do with them? Because it's not enough to hire a diverse student workforce. You have to support them. You have to work with them. All right, so new perspectives, a sense of belonging. I appreciate who said that because that's one of our later slides. New ideas, skills, these are exactly the right things. And I will say from my standpoint, the ideas that you get from a diverse group are just fundamentally better than if you get an echo chamber of things. And we've seen this again and again as we've run trainings, as we've done different things. And from the student perspective, we have one of our students that'll, we have a video at the end, and she'll talk about the lasting impact of that, the kinds of things that mattered to her when she went out into the workforce, how they affected her confidence, her ability to be successful because of that diverse environment. So I think I'll turn it over to you.
So for our student journeys, it honestly took a lot of deciding to figure out who we were going to talk about, because we have so many over so many years, some before I started, that have just achieved great things and have become incredibly successful, and some of them in our own department. So our first one is student A. They started as a computer science major and was also a CWIT scholar. And they were feeling like, this is cool, I like the IT world, but I'm not getting a connection with people. So they ended up transitioning to an information systems degree, a little less coding, but more relation with people and figuring out how to communicate IT and doing some more things along that. She was actually recruited following, I believe, one of your guest lectures in the CWIT Scholar program, and then ended up working in our physical networks department and has achieved some great things from there. So our student B was actually a student of mine in our audiovisual department a couple of years ago. He was an immigrant and a first-generation student. We actually hired him and his sister from a local community college who had transferred in after 2 years. He was an information systems major, and he had so much experience working at his community college at the IT help desk doing tier 1 support. So when he applied, just out of chance, we're like, sweet, this is great. He has some experience. Like, this is a total win for us.
And he could talk to people.
He could talk to people, which sometimes is very difficult for students. He could communicate. We're like, awesome. So he started in our audiovisual support team, which is a lot of helping professors in classrooms and doing more hands-on, like individual support, room checks, things like that. And he was there for about 6 months, and he was like, I need more experience. I'm an information systems major. I'm a junior. I worked at the help desk. Now I'm basically working at a different type of help desk. I need to do something more technical. I need something else. So we had just spent 6 months training him, and he was fantastic. And we're like, okay, yes, we'll get you more experience, and we're very excited for you. This sucks, but okay. So we actually handed him over to the networks team for a few hours a week. So he was with us a little bit, he was with the networks team for a little bit. And so he felt like he got some more experience. He got to work with the network students, meet more students, do some things. And then he's like, I actually kind of like AV better. And we're like, okay, that's fine. You can come back. And at that point, we needed someone to help with our AV install team. So he ended up working on our AV install team until he graduated. Our AV install team does a lot of the classroom install for our audiovisual system. We don't use an integrator. We rarely use integrators. So he was helping lead our team of like pulling cables, assembling racks, and doing things like that. So he really got a varied experience in our IT department.
And then one of our last two we'll talk about, another non-traditional student. He was an undergraduate in information systems, but he came back to school later in life. He had been doing various jobs for about 10 years after high school, and then was looking to kind of reinvent himself, restart his career. He worked in our client services group. Again, he loved being able to work with customers and help them and sort of find a solution to that problem. And so we were fortunate to have him and had him for a good year and a half. And our last one, and so we were trying to be good about people's names, but Karen's going to introduce herself in her video. So, so Karen was a CWIT scholar. She had never had any experience in computing. She just kind of wanted a part-time job. And she was hired in because her advisor over in CWIT had said, hey, this is a good place. It'll get you some experience. Maybe you'll learn something different than you're going to do in your classes. So we're going to come back to these 4 students and kind of talk about where they went and some of the experiences they had. But the meat of this isn't about UMBC in particular. It's about what can you do? How can you do this? Because it's great. I am so happy we did this. I love it. It's one of my favorite things to talk about. But I want everybody to be doing this. So what are some things you can do at your organization? And the first step is getting these students. We all have scholar programs at our organization. They maybe it's an honors college, maybe it's presidential scholars, sometimes it's founding scholars, or it's the name of a school, and it's this, whatever it is. I've got a high school senior, we're going through college searches and applications now. We all have scholar programs. These students are some of your brightest. They're also some of your busiest. So it does take some work to work with them to make sure you can meet them where they are. You're not trying to sort of over-program them because their schedules are already going to be full. But they are also some of your most driven students, some of your most creative students. And so they're a really good source to sort of pull from and build relationships with those programs to talk with them. We have a program with our CWIT scholars where I meet with all the first years in November. I love hiring in freshmen, but I don't want to hire somebody in the first day they step on campus. I want them to get themselves settled in college, know that they're feeling okay about it, their time management is there, let them get through their first semester, and then let's talk about, can we give them some real world experience so that when they go for that awesome internship that summer of junior year that's probably going to lead to their full-time job, they can talk about real work they've done that somebody who's just taken classes can't talk about. Guest lecture in classes. Tell your story. One of the things that's been interesting over the years to me is students love hearing how other people got into the field and how they got their experience and what they went through. And first year programs, beginning computer science, and it doesn't have to just be the typical, let's go talk to computer science students, let's go talk to IT or information students. Biology students, physics, psychology, social science, you name it, they're all using data. We have data science classes in about 6 or 8 different majors now. So there's opportunities for these students. They're all working in IT. They're all digital natives at this point. So you can recruit from a very broad audience in your institution. It doesn't have to just be those 1 or 2 majors. And then work with those academic departments. Partner with the chairs, go to their events. If you can put yourself out there and the students see you as a viable option, you can really make some impact. There was a gentleman from the CIO from UNLV, I don't think he's here today, but we were talking the other day. He actually works with his enrollment management group, and he goes into high schools and he attends some of the high school events to talk about the job opportunities when the students come to school about working in IT. So he's trying to get access to those students before they've set on campus. Not that they need to start day one, but to let them know that these opportunities exist, here's the value, here's what both sides get out of this. So there's a lot of ways to do this recruitment. So think about who could you partner with? Who are the resources academically, administratively across the campus that you could work with to sort of build that pipeline? And then once you have the students.
So how do you develop them? This is an interesting topic and something that I went to a very landlocked college in Pennsylvania, central Pennsylvania. I was not with a diverse workforce because my college was not very diverse. And we were all from different disciplines. There were a few of us that were in similar programs, but our team of about 10, 11 became a bond, and those are still some of my best friends from college, or the people I worked with. So in addition to making a comfortable environment and making them feel like they belong, instill like that love of IT, make sure they're passionate and they're not just doing busy work. Our students do really important things for us. They're running projects, they're doing installs by themselves. Like, we're here to guide and to help, but they're not just answering a phone and saying, okay, we'll send a full-time staff member down. They're not just putting labels on things. They're actually doing meaningful work that's a huge help to us. So in addition to that, it's important to remember that they're students. So help them get some professional development. I can't tell you how many resumes I've looked at for our students and said, all right, have you talked to the Career Center? Have you maybe had some other people take a look at this besides you and your friends? It's important to be a resource for them and also connect them with the appropriate resources and saying, okay, let's go to the Career Center. Are you guys going to the career fair today? I understand that's during your shift, but you can go to the career fair. That's an acceptable excuse for missing part of your shift today. We want you to do that. And also connecting them with other groups like student affairs and other things. When they're having issues with advisors and things, you become a trusted person to them. And they say, I don't know what classes to do. I don't know what is next in my degree program. Just helping them find the right person to talk to is important. So I guess about a year ago, well, thank you. I guess about a year ago, we had this student workforce group that was tasked with coming up with some recommendations of how to further develop our students, how to make sure they were actually getting exposure to other IT careers, because a lot of them, start in our client services department and they're re-imaging computers and then they stay there for 4 years. And that's great. They get a lot of good experience, but what about all the other things in IT that they could be doing? Oops.
That's the other way.
Wrong way, sorry. So we started these lunch and learns sessions where we invite different members of our IT department to be guest presenters. So relatively low lift because we're all there anyway. And one of the important parts to me, was pulling in a lot of interactive elements in the session because students get lectured at like this every single day. They don't want to come to more of that. That's optional. So how can we show them different careers in IT and expose them to different things and what the other students are doing in IT without standing there and talking at them? So we've done some really interesting things in the past year with these. We do them about monthly. We had our high performance computing folks set up this whole Minecraft environment and explain how high performance computing is basically like mining ore in Minecraft. And when we asked the students how many of them actually played Minecraft, like 2 raised their hands, but I think they were lying. At least I hope so. One of our lunch and learns was on an active install site. We were renovating that classroom and from an AV perspective. So we were showing them how we pull cable through walls and ceilings and how we terminate cable and how we build a rack and how we then program the equipment in there. Our security. So as this went on, it took a point where we had a couple student teams that were like, can we be presenters? I'm like, sure, that'd be great. You guys want to present to your fellow students. So our telecommunications and security student team, with some guidance, of course, but they put together this entire presentation where they tracked Waldo, who had the big, long red hat and everything, all through campus using security cameras and swipe card access. So it was a really interesting and very fun experience to watch the security team live tracking one of their fellow students running through a building and trying to find out where he was, showing that we can do a lot with our security camera systems and our swipe systems. So those student teams began to lead those sessions. That's still ongoing. And of course, we feed them and pay them because you can attract a lot of college students if you offer them free food. But we've had some really great experiences at those. They've been some really well attended and a great way to introduce them to different careers and things.
And I think, and here's some pictures of some of them. And I think I forgot to mention that we have more students than we do full-time staff. And that's always been our case. So we're 95 full-time staff. We're usually around 100 students. And that's usually what our ratio is. And we get over half of all of our students at each of these lunch and learns. Mm-hmm. And now, I think the last 4 have been put on by the students, give or take.
Yep. Yeah, so a couple of these photos on here in the top left is our new media studio. They do video services for our campus. So it is actually in the process of being renovated. So the month before they shut down the building and had to move out, we actually were able to give our students a tour of that. A couple of these photos, though, that's our client services student team doing a presentation in the middle, our audiovisual students doing presentations and some of the others. And then we've done things like data center tours and a lot of other variety of some interesting things.
We now have a request from our full-time staff to attend the lunch and learns run by our students because they want to learn from this and they want to do this. And we do. I learned at the AV one, so I'm also currently the interim CISO, and I learned at the AV one that every one of our mics that we install is now online and has a network address and needs to be patched. And so sometimes you learn good things and sometimes you learn things you wish you didn't know. So Ali's going to talk about this slide, but again, I was playing around with AI image generation. So the prompt for this, when we talk about workspaces, was make a welcoming, futuristic hybrid IT workspace in the style of Calvin and Hobbes. I don't know how many folks remember Calvin and Hobbes. Anybody remember it looking like that? But if you notice, there's like this weird bee, tiger thing in the middle. So that's the AI's version of Calvin and Hobbes, apparently.
So rethinking our workspaces, this has been a struggle, and I'll say I just got an email about this morning of how do we rethink this? Because some of our students are working remotely and some of them can. Our help desk is entirely remote for our campus. So those students are working entirely remotely from their dorms for the most part. And some of our other students, like our data center students and other things, are working remotely most of the time. But how do you allow them to connect with staff? But some of us are only on campus a couple days a week. So are we going to have our students come in when we're not there? Or is someone else going to be there for them? And can you put them near the full-time staff, or are they in a total other building, total other room? And then when you have students, I right now have a student who's working 1 to 4 3 days a week. The only other student on my floor that works at those hours is in a totally different department. So they sit in the room together and they don't talk to each other because they're working on different things. So how do you make it so they have a team, they have a connection, even if they're working on solitary projects, and so they're connected with the full-time staff? I think the lunch and learns have been helpful for this because it's the opportunity of all of the students from all different disciplines coming in one room. And it's interesting to see which teams work together a lot and which teams don't. The security team is one that kind of most of the time is in their own little bubble doing their own thing. Whereas you get the audiovisual students, the network students, and the desktop students, they're all working together on a lot of projects and a lot of tickets. So they all know each other, they have some connections. So it's an interesting way to try to force them to talk to each other, make friends, but also be connected with full-time staff.
And this has been a challenge. I mean, I don't want to sugarcoat it. This slide and the next slide are talking about some of the real challenges of doing this. We had some student teams working remote, and it just didn't work. They weren't connected with each other. They weren't connected with their work. We actually had them, we brought them back on campus. Even though the full-timers were hybrid, we tried to arrange schedules and things. And the feedback I've gotten is they now get along great with each other where they weren't really talking. So they formed a really cohesive group. And when they're now frustrated at the full-time staff as a cohesive group, which is progress. But it's, they're asking for more structure. They're asking for more interactions. They don't want to just be sitting in a room doing something. They want these interactions. They want the mentorship and the structure. So this is something we are still working out. So I would do everything we've done. I love what we've done. I love how much we embrace students, but it is not all positive. You do have to really think through some of these and make some changes to your staffing as well.
And I'll say until recently I was on the audiovisual team. At the time there were 5 full-time staff on that team, and when we were all working remotely or some hybrid of some aspect, it became a scenario of we all supervised them, which was okay. It actually worked out very well that way, because then when so-and-so was home that day, I can step in and help them when they need help and answer questions. But then it also becomes a thing of the students are going, who do I call when I'm sick and I come to my shift? Do I call my supervisor? Do I call the generic office line and tell another student? Who do I call? So then it became an issue on us, on the full-time staff, of communicating with each other of, okay, Joe said he's out today, so we have an opening in the shift. And so it's complicated and it's hard, but you have to figure it out. So interrupting bias. So of course we went from a very non-diverse group 10 years ago to a very diverse group of student employees. So different cultural norms with everybody, how they speak to women, how they, handle tickets, the different levels of interaction that people are just raised with that's part of their culture. So consider the benefits and costs of all of this, and is it bias? Is it something else? And interrupt that, ask questions, and say, well, why are we thinking about this way? Why do we phrase this way? And bring about that dissonance of thinking like, okay, is this okay? Let's break this up and figure out where we all are. NC WIT has a lot of good resources for this, and some of them have been used by us.
And this is one where you do have to do some training. If you do training with the students and you expose them to these ideas, not all of them are. Some of them are very familiar. Some of them, we have a set of international grad students that we've brought on the campus in recent years, and so we've hired some of them in. They come with great experiences, but there are some different cultural norms there. And what we found is if we do this training, then we have maybe misunderstandings and we have bias that we need to interrupt, and these are manageable. If we don't do that training, then things can get worse, and students might not even feel comfortable explaining what's going on, and we don't want to be in that situation. So this is something where, as you build the diversity, you have to acknowledge it and you have to work through some of these things.
And I'll say this is definitely something that it's a good resource to have a lot of full-time staff or a few full-time staff in your department available, because I know I've had students come to me, and instead of going to someone else who might be their supervisor on paper, who they see more often, but if they're comfortable talking to me, that's fine. They can come talk to me. And then sometimes, if it's not me, that's also great. They go to somebody else. So it's important to have a couple of different mentor relationships and a couple full-time relationships. So if they're experiencing an issue like this, they can go to someone they feel comfortable with to talk to.
All right, so the last part of this, and then we'll open it up to questions. I did tell you we could talk about this for a while, is how do you get folks to staff? It was quick to change the student diversity, to change how we function with students. Staff turnover takes a lot longer. Oh, well, we hope it takes a lot longer. One of the things that we did when we changed our hiring practices, our recruiting practices, how we do this is we introduced more intentional hiring practices into the student process. That meant the staff had to get used to those. They had to understand them. We did training with them. In certain groups there was resistance because nobody was trying not to do things the right way, but it was re-educating on sort of what are the best practices, how do we need to evolve that. But as we did that more and more, well, now when we go to hire full-time staff, that's the process they're used to. They're used to those more inclusive hiring practices. They're used to those things, and so we're applying them to the full-time staff when we do recruitment on that side. And that cultural shift of how do you get your staff used to that, how they're interviewing, how they're doing the questions, how they're writing the job ads, by doing that with the students first, it all flowed into the full-time staff. I think you're going to take this one, right?
I think so. We've touched on this already, build a welcoming environment. They care about being in a place where they feel safe. It's a comfortable place. I'll say we've had students, who still do, that come to work when they're not working. I'm like, why are you here? You're not on shift. And they're like, well, I just wanted to hang out here and do some homework. I'm like, all right, that's fine, but like, make sure people know you're not working. But, go sit in the back. So they care about their fellow employees. And I'll say 3 of our desktop students who worked together for about 3 years, there's a photo of them earlier, the 3 of them graduated, and all 3 of them went on a trip to Japan together for graduation, because all 3 of them had different majors. They were in different groups, different social circles, but they had worked together for so long, they became like best friends. So the 3 of them went on a graduation trip to Japan, which sounds really cool. So make sure they're included in not only the student environment, but also in the entirety of IT. We mentioned our students are doing real work. They're not doing busy work. So make sure they know the bigger purpose of what the mission is, what they're doing, of, okay, you're not just pulling cable in the ceiling. This is to connect microphones so faculty can teach hybrid and lecture capture courses. So make sure they're doing meaningful things. And that may seem hard and scary to let a student who doesn't know a whole lot do important things, but that's how they learned. That's how we all did.
And I will say, there were, at the beginning when we asked how many students were in the groups, a number of people said 1 to 10. And I'm going to bet if you were one of the people that said 1 to 10, they're probably doing first-line help desk support, because that's usually what we see. That's like the place where people will use students, and that's kind of okay. As Ali said, we have our students doing full-time staff work. We have them on the networking side. They've led building installations. They led our wireless redesign. They do the same work of the full-time staff. Yes, they have a little more oversight and guidance, but I had a former student that came back. He left and went to a company as a network engineer, and we met with him a month later, and he said, I had more access into the campus network as a student than I have in my full-time job. Like, they won't let me touch any of this stuff, but I could work on it. I already know what I'm doing. And that makes a difference. It keeps them interested in the field. It shows them what the possibilities are, and it does connect them to the mission. Nobody I know went into higher ed IT because they thought that was the quick way to get rich. If anybody did and it worked out, I'd love to talk afterwards. But we're doing this because we care about it. We want to make a difference. We are connected to the mission. If you can get the students bought into that and they can see the benefit, the impact they're having, then that changes the conversation when you're trying to negotiate with potentially a 22-year-old of why they should stay and work for you versus go to that private firm that's guaranteed to be paying them a little more money. So it really does matter. And then one of the other things you can do is you've got to identify these candidates early. Like your top students, we see this. They may get a job offer coming out of that junior year internship. Okay, that's great. But if you have people that are in a BS/MS program, their funding a lot of times, their scholarships may only be that 4 years. So can you get them for that last year? Can you talk with them? Is it helpful? Because again, then you're building that relationship. We have a number of graduate students that they're not looking to become faculty, but they want that graduate degree, and so there's an opportunity to put them on assistantships, students that aren't quite sure what they want to do. You've had a couple of those.
A lot who graduate and then they're like, I don't have a job yet. I'm like, okay, so what have you done? What are you applying? And then we're able to get them on a contractual position for a little bit so they could hang out and do more work and help us more while they're trying to figure out what they want to do with their lives and where they want to go. Yeah,
and it's usually not that they can't get a job, it's that they want to get a job doing something that they're really excited about, so they want to figure that out. And we have a number, we're in the Baltimore area, we have a lot of people that go work for the federal government or a federal government contractor, so we've gotten used to, can we bring people on for a year or two while they're waiting for that government clearance? We can have them work on projects, we can have them as sort of pseudo full-time staff, and then we're showing them something real. They can see what they're doing, they can enjoy what they're doing, where that other position sort of nebulous off in the distance. Maybe it comes through, maybe something else happens, but they're working here, and if they're happy with what they're doing, sometimes they'll stay. But we can't keep everyone, so that's the other thing is we have great students, but we can't keep all of them. So some of the students we mentioned earlier.
So one of our students in the top left here we mentioned them earlier. They're a CWIT scholar. They were at Information Systems, worked with our physical network group for a long time. They've had internships with Cisco 2 consecutive summers in interns, really successful internships. They also do a lot of the student training for networking, so that's something we really rely on, is our senior students, those graduates, or grad students, those students that we hire on contract, they're helping train the new ones. So that's really, really helpful for us as full-time staff to have other people they can rely upon. And the student is actually starting work at Cisco Mirakai after graduation. One of our others, my student, he actually wasn't sure what he wanted to do when he graduated. He had applied to a few positions, and we were actually just about to open up a spot for a Salesforce administrator. So he had talked to me about it. I was like, I don't know a whole lot about it, but talk to this person. They're a good resource. Talk to somebody else in our group. And we actually hired him into our department as a Salesforce admin, and he just passed his second Trailhead certification.
And so what he really learned was what he didn't want to do in some of the student positions, which is a great time to learn. I'd much rather, I tell my son this, take a job in college, and if you don't like it, great. Better you learn that than after college. And so our last one, he came to work for us after graduation, worked in client services, then went off, and then we actually recruited him back a couple years later to help head up our telecom group, and he's now the IT director at a large DoD contractor, so he's done quite well, but we still maintain that relationship. The last person, Karen, is what I want to leave you with, because I gave a version of this talk on Monday, and I put this video in the middle, and then I realized that when she got done, I then had to keep talking, and that was not what I wanted, because I don't want to have to follow her. So we'll let her tell her story, and then we'll open it up for questions for you all.
Hi, my name is Karen Kibler. I used to work in the physical network department here at UMBC. I then took an internship with T. Rowe Price, and I actually got hired full-time after I graduated. I was still a student here. I passed that test based off of my experiences just working as a student network technician. And that job impressed my industry mentor, because I was a CWIT scholar. And we met in there, and I'm like, yeah, I installed these WAPs, I did the cabling. She's like, you did what? She was so amazed, and she kept pushing me to apply for the T. Rowe internship, just based off of my experiences that I did here. I had no idea that this whole world would open up to me, and it all started right here as a student, not knowing, the longevity of what I was doing. I just wanted something, get paid, get a little experience. I'm working with cool devices with the blinking lights, and oh, this is how the internet works. This is how we get our connectivity. Okay, it's cool, but it turned out to be an amazing career starter for me, and I am forever grateful. So it was both a male and female atmosphere. It was very diverse as far as demographically, race-wise. Going into the actual workforce, totally different. Culture shock. I thought it would actually be more of a balance, but it wasn't. But because I was so comfortable and I had all this experience here, I felt confident speaking boldly when I noticed things or when situations would arise, and I felt comfortable giving my input because I had the experience. I wish it was more so like how the demographics was in physical networks. And it's amazing because having the diversity with the student base, I know a lot of us ended up staying in the IT industry. So had I not felt comfortable as a student, who's to say if I would even still be in STEM as I am today? I feel like having the diversity in the student force will help pipeline those students into the IT industry and create a more diverse IT industry. Because when I feel like I could be a part of that change, and I am that change, and it's because of my experiences here.
So that's why we're doing this, is for that. So thank you all for listening. You can see why I didn't want to go after her. That is literally, I mean, that is just the reason we're doing this. So we're happy to take questions. I don't know if I can actually get this back, but there we go. You just have to go up to the, I was told you have to go up to the mics because they're recording. I know it's the last day. I know there's only one more session. There have to be questions. Thank you.
Could you say a little bit about how much the university acknowledges this initiative as a benefit, not to UMBC, but to the students, this ability to get professional development beyond the classroom?
So they've always been very supportive of this. It was one where, so our former president, Dr. Rabowski, when he came back in 2018 and came to another division-wide meeting, we brought, again, we always bring our students, and at that point, he was talking to them, and he made a point after that to connect us with our advancement group where our marketing and communications was, and made sure we started to tell our story around the university so that the other groups, and again, our student affairs does a great job with this as well, so we're not the only one, but they've been very supportive and excited. They often will pull us in and our students in to talk about this work to people in industry as they bring them through, or other groups, to show the kinds of students that we're creating that are then going to go out in the workforce and the kind of caliber we're doing. So they've been extremely supportive of it.
Hey, Damian.
Hey.
So I see that you're doing a lot with the whole networking, and that's awesome. But since so much is happening in the cloud, you guys also open up access to, you know, all these students so that they have that experience before they go out?
So when I said, you know, a lot of the first way people use students is just for the help desk, and we don't do that. We use students in every single group on campus. So our identity group, our cloud group, our security group, high performance computing, client services, AV, business analytics, data science. I know I'm leaving a couple out, but
Project
literally.
management. Project management.
Project management. Yep, you've now got
Yeah.
a couple of students. Every group has students, and at times, I mean, when we made that transition, because years ago, some of the groups did this really well, some didn't. There's always resistance. There's always maybe it's I have to provide X level of service, and I can't have that drop because we're going to use students, and they might not know as much as it. We've worked through that every time, because I'll tell you what, if a staff member screws up something for a faculty member, they may be really irritated. If a student screws up something for a faculty member, they're much more understanding, because this is part of what they do as well, like they're teaching. And so we are at a university. We can embrace this, and we can work through that, and we can put in procedures and things. So no, every single group gets it. And cloud we got our first 2 students last year in cloud. And one of them just won a hackathon, his project, his group, and it was something he did in AWS. I'm going to butcher it, but it was something around sort of like automating how you could do geolocation for certain things in a city structure. And their project won, and they're going to go on and submit it further. And the architecture of it was because of the work he had done in IT, learning how to use some of those cloud resources. So yeah, great question.
I'll also add to that and say, not only are students doing a lot of support and things, and faculty are very appreciative of it, they also, because they're working in our professional environment in an office setting, they're using that for projects. So I had a group last year who, their capstone project, they were part of a team, and 2 of the members of that 4-person team happened to work in our department. So they used their whole capstone project and designed it around our AV install process. So their project was the only one of that entire class based in reality. So they did interviews with me and a couple of the full-time staff instead of creating a fictional scenario of a project process.
Good evening. First, I want to say thank you for your story and presentation. It's very motivating to see you're doing it. So, my question is about so you moved in 5 years, and so you have this real rich diversity in your student working group. How did that start off? Did you have a not very diverse applicant pool to start, and what kind of hurdles did
Yeah,
you?
we really were hiring through friends, and we were hiring non-diverse. We had non-diverse students, and so we were hiring the friends of non-diverse students. The biggest thing, the two biggest things we did was I was already working with our Center for Women in Technology, so we developed what I would call a pretty formal pipeline program where we said, okay, we'll talk to them when they're freshmen. We know by the time they're juniors, they're going to be doing these great internships, but they were having trouble getting internships in freshman or sophomore year. So we said, well, great, if we can get some that want to come work for us, we'll get them experience now. In that sophomore year, they had a leg up, but we would get them for 12 to 18 months. That started to shift the needle, and then we did a better job of maybe we will hire somebody's friends, but we're going to put this on the campus hiring portal, and we're going to change around those hiring processes so we're not just, oh yeah, no, they seem good, let's hire them. Let's actually have a structure to this. Let's be intentional about that. So those were probably the two biggest things that we did. The CWIT part was it was easier in one sense, except that then people were kind of annoyed at me because I'm like, hey, I found a student for you. And they didn't love that. But the hiring one took longer because that was retraining the staff on how they did their hiring, and they were doing a good job, but they weren't using the best practices. And so that was how do we incorporate those inclusive practices into hiring, and that took a little longer.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you again.
I know we're at time, so I want to be conscious of everybody's time. Do you have, please go. That's fine.
So yeah, great presentation. So as we, great structure, you talked about some of the challenges that you've ran into as part of this process. So looking at this whole life cycle, if there were like some top 3 lessons learned that you'd like to share with us regarding the challenges and something that you learned from, and could be a takeaway for us.
So I'd say for me it was you do have to be intentional about the hiring. It can't just be let's hope it gets better. This has to be a stated focus. Do that bias training and don't take for granted that everybody's just going to get along when you do this. That was a lesson learned the hard way. And then I think make sure that you are doing that continuous development. The stuff we're doing that Ali started with these lunch and learns and the way we're now connecting the students across the division. We don't have students that only ever know about one part of IT and then they work there for 3 years and they graduate and that's all they do. They now know. They know high-performance computing, they know security, they know networking, they know data science, they at least are exposed to all of these. So I think those are mine. Any last quick things before we?
I think you covered it.
Okay. Thank you all very much. We're happy to stay around and take any more questions you have, but thank you all so much for being present here.